VP of Clean Line Energy. I'm sure many of you who've been following transmission remember Clean Line Energy and Michael Skelly and Jimmy Glotfelty. There's a very big vision for building some transmission HVDC lines from east to west in the middle of the country that really showed up the problems of building long distance transmission in the US. And prior to that, Jimmy served as a senior policy advisor to the US Secretary of Energy and also as the energy policy director to Governor George Bush in Texas. One thing I didn't know about Jimmy was that he founded and led the Office of Electricity at the US Department of Energy. So feather in your hat for Jimmy for that. Jimmy is no stranger to ESIG. He's spoken at ESIG in the past when he was with Clean Line. He's spoken about transmission primarily here, and we're very glad to have him back. So welcome back, Jimmy, and I'm going to turn it over to you for your keynote comments.
That sounds great. Thank you for the introduction. And I first want to say I wish I was there with y'all. It's spring here, which means storms and all sorts of challenges with our weather here. We had some major storms last night. Tornadoes and outages and all sorts of things across the big state of Texas. So I wish I had been there in person and hope to do so in the future, but I'm glad I could join you and give you a little bit of kind of our thought process and what we're dealing with here in Texas as we try to deal with the resource adequacy issue based upon not only the winter storm Uri. That was really the kind of the exclamation point at the end of the sentence. But the sentence is, how do we ensure a reliable system with resource adequacy in a cost-efficient way for our economy to continue to grow and our electricity system to remain reliable and cost-effective for all classes of customers. These issues are not new to you all. In fact, the thing that I've loved about working with Charlie and ESIG is that you get to the crux of the issue. You take a policy issue down to analytics, and it's the engineering and it's the math analytics that are absolutely critical as we move forward in this discussion, not only in Texas and ERCOT, but all around the US. And I know there are other regions that are ahead of us. We are trying to do things in our own way as we have historically done here in ERCOT. And that makes us perhaps a little bit slower, but hopefully we can get it right. And we can keep our system an energy-only system and one that drives more free market investment in our state. What I wanted to do was, I didn't really know how I was going to frame this debate, this discussion for you this morning, but it really is a debate between lots of choice A and choice B. And I've written a list of what these choices are, and I think the biggest one that we are facing is one that has been solved in other markets, but it hasn't been here, and that is a capacity market versus an energy-only market. We have most of our stakeholders who like the energy-only market and the construct that provides. We have lots of customer classes that appreciate that, not paying for excess capacity that they may not need, but then again, may not understanding that insurance, there's a cost to that, versus the capacity market construct, which is obviously in other regions. And the 2 points on the capacity market are either, is it centrally procured or not? So again, version 1, version 2. As you all know, Texas has said that up to this point that a capacity market is not what they envision, and a centrally procured one is more so not what they envision. So we are trending towards the energy-only market and figuring out how we can ensure resource adequacy within the energy constructs. And I think that leads us more towards ancillary services than capacity. Other issues that we're dealing with are, do we do this firming, so to speak, on the load side or on the generation side? Is it a load obligation or is it a firming obligation? Obviously, we have people on both sides of that equation. Costs ultimately get borne by load, so there's an efficiency component here. But what we're trying to do is analyze, and we will analyze over the next handful of months, how a load-serving entity obligation what it may cost consumers, and what that amount of insurance is that we're buying. One of the things that we've had the challenge of over the last few months is we've asked the question, will this, this is a blank, will this proposal spur new generation in our state? And if so, what kind? With the goal being that there is more dispatchable resources. The legislature acted and said that they want more dispatchable resources in the state. And I think under their construct, that primarily means thermal resources. So gas-fired power plants, combined cycle plants, peaker facilities, and other types of facilities that can be turned on and turned off when they need to, especially during times of resource limitations. So we have thermal versus intermittent. And I think what that really drives us towards is our part of the economic question, which is we've got tons of companies coming to the state that want our low-cost renewables. And then we have a legislature that has pushed us more towards more reliable dispatchable thermals. Again, this one versus that one, and we're trying to weave this answer in the middle of how we get both. We have issues of, as others do, thermal versus battery. What is considered dispatchable? And I know you all are talking about accreditation of resources and such. Clearly, that is a staple when you come into trying to understand what resource adequacy is. We don't have that many batteries on our system, and it's hard for me to get my head around, betting the entire system on batteries when we just haven't had that much experience with them. But I do believe that they will actually do more than we expect, do more than we hope. And that makes it challenging for us to really frame out the thermal versus battery. We understand how thermal plants work, but we don't yet understand how all of the battery systems work, either independently or together, and at the transmission or distribution voltage. So again, another, this versus that. Specifically within the battery community, we hear that we need longer duration batteries. And then we also hear that longer duration batteries will never be the primary servicer to the market. It's short duration. And when I say short, that's primarily 2 hours or less, are the ones that are going to manage this, this market going forward. And again, here we have this construct of which one is right. We're trying to get to the analytical piece beneath that. We've had, these questions aren't new to us, but they're coming at a critical time for our system, and they're coming at a critical time as we have huge amounts of renewables and batteries that are coming onto our system. So that leads us back to, one of the primary questions, which is, so what is the resource adequacy standard that we are trying to achieve? Is it the old loss of load probability, where you take your peak summer day and add, 15%? Or is it something different where it's EUE, where it's the other components of kind of energy driven on a per day basis to ensure that the energy that's needed, however it's procured or however it's driven, is there on a hour by hour basis. We've focused on somewhat of the loss of load probability because we've had a short time to do this. The EUE and other methods such as that, I think, are coming into more clearer pictures. about how they may be used, and it may be a transitionary component towards them. But kind of the old capacity construct is, I think, where we are right now. And that doesn't mean that's what will be adopted, here in the future, but that's where we are today. We also have an issue that is one, I think this is not unique to this industry, which is, do we supply and create resource adequacy solely through the supply side of new power plants and the production of electrons, or how much are we going to rely on demand response, distributed generation, and energy efficiency? And it's my view that the energy efficiency, the demand response, and the distributed generation are absolutely price setters in the market. And if we try to go and allow their implementation and participation in the market after we create a program that pushes for just supply side resource, what you're going to do is you're going to undercut your cost causation or your cost formation, and you're not going to have the market that you were expecting. So we need to be pushing the energy efficiency, the demand response, and the distributed generation protocols to allow those entities on our system, just like we do the new supply side. There are just a couple more here that I want to go through, and then I'm happy to answer questions and have this move towards discussion. I think what we've seen is in the Texas market since the early 2000s, we used to have the independent power producers, the new kids on the block versus the utilities, the old guys on the block. And I think we've seen that change a little bit more towards the renewables and the battery folks, who are the new kids on the block, versus the IPPs, who are the old kids on the block. And we're seeing some of the same behavior in each of those at different times. And it's been interesting to see that as we have gone through the decades. I'm sure it's not the last time we'll see this type of behavior, but ultimately there will be something that comes along in terms of new technology where renewables and batteries will take the posture of trying to protect a market as opposed to allowing innovation to happen all over the place. And again, something to be aware of as we watch those dynamics play, in terms of resource adequacy. So let me say that the one bigger thing that we have that is in Texas, this has nothing to do with the electric system, and this has nothing to do with molecules or electrons. But as you all know, ERCOT is governed by the Texas legislature. So where we stand today is we have the Senate, who favors some proposals, and the House, who favors other proposals. They're not in session now, but they will become this next January. This issue is sure to get a lot of play in both chambers of the House and the Senate. But again, we have one versus the other, and we'll ultimately get to a conclusion here. Finally, I want to say that as we go through this, we look at demand side resources, and we look at supply side resources. The other that I think we need to look at that gets lost in this many times here in Texas is congestion and transmission. We have to ensure that we eliminate transmission congestion, at least those that are the most costly to consumers, so that we can ensure that most resources are calculated correctly into our resource adequacy equation. It's not fair for those who have invested to not be able to be a part of that equation. And I feel that solving the transmission piece is absolutely critical to making sure that the equation that we are going to look at that's going to drive future policies is fair and understandable and equitable for all resources. Within the transmission component and the transmission congestion piece, we also have the ties to other regions, which is something that, as you all know, we have talked about for a number of decades. It's been looked at. Do we integrate with the Eastern or the Western interconnection? Or do we increase the use of direct current ties? I think the first issue is still one that Texas is not willing to give up its jurisdiction to FERC in this regard. So that leaves DC ties as a probable answer. And as long as the DC ties get you far enough away and give you geographic diversity of the resource, then I think they're very valuable. I think we saw in the Winter Storm Uri that if we had counted on just the DC ties to our neighboring regions, we wouldn't have gotten a whole lot of help. But if you can go multi-states away, we may be able to add huge amounts of value to that. Also, as these storms historically have gone south and east, there may be benefits to bringing in resources from the west. So all of these things are issues that we and others are trying to evaluate and determine what the best path forward is. What we have not had up to this point is robust analytical modeling exercises to show us the costs, the benefits, the values of each of these types of proposals. The proposals, as you know, are a dispatchable energy credit proposal, a load-serving entity obligation, a firming requirement, a backstop reliability service, and there are others. We've received information from a number of senators on a new proposal that was put forth by STEC, South Texas Electric Cooperative, that they want us to study as well. I wish I could say we're at the end of this process, but we're not. We're still in the midst of it. And it's my belief that we have to let analytics drive the day, and that we have to show that we have to show by analytics that we're going to have a more reliable system at a fair cost. I think we found that Texans are interested and are okay to pay a little bit more for reliability and insurance policy. But that's not going to be a blank check to allow us to just fund lots of different programs with nobody checking on the cost. That's not the way we want to operate for Texans. We want to keep costs low and keep the economy humming. So I think what I've given you is a lot of the equations that we have to evaluate. We have, I didn't necessarily go through the phase one proposals that we have adopted and that are being put in place with ORDC and other changes. I'm sure you all will have your discussions about them, but we have lots of work to do. And having entities like ESIG and the individual market participants giving us their views and their analytics is really key for us getting it right. So lots of work to do, lots of analysis to do, and excited to have the opportunity to help lead Texas in this the direction where we can allow all of these resources, both load side and demand side, to participate in this market, create more reliability and drive down costs. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. I'm happy to have comments or thoughts or anything that you all seem to think would be relevant to the conversation. I'm happy to take them and take my best crack at answering those questions or giving you my thoughts.
Okay. Okay, so we're ready to go ahead and move on into the first session of the morning on resource adequacy, which is evolutions in resource adequacy. It'll be chaired by Mark O'Malley, Chief Scientist of ESIG, along with a number of other hats that he wears. Mark was going to be with us here today, but some other things came up in Ireland, which kept him at home. So he's in Dublin, but he's with us in spirit, and he'll be chairing the session remotely. So Mark, let me go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you good.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. Okay, so listen, apologies to everyone that I didn't make it. And with regard to hats, as you can see, I've removed a lot of my main hat. The hair got cut today, especially for this event. I suppose I was bragging a couple of months ago that I bought my ticket, etc. So maybe I was a bit arrogant. But anyway, I'm sorry I can't be there. The topic of resource adequacy is obviously very important. I myself was introduced to it maybe 10 or 15 years ago when I chaired an IEEE group on it. And at the time, I remember, you know, we were there to try and calculate the capacity value of wind, for example. And yeah, it was a, you know, it was a problem, but it could be solved. And I sort of felt that this was an area that, you know, was pretty much, I wouldn't say done, but, you know, was well on its way to being resolved. But I think Jimmy, in his presentation, some of the questions highlight the fact that so much is changing. There's so much practical things that happen in reality that this area will continue to evolve, and it's a very messy area, if I could put it that way. Directly after this session, Derek Stenlick is going to chair another session that's mainly focused on the market issues. This session is, I suppose, based on the analysis, the analytics of the whole space of resource adequacy. 4 speakers, 2 from Europe and 2 from the United States. So without further ado, I'll introduce the first speaker. So it's Ralph Pfeiffer. He's the head of the National European Grid Planning Process at Amprion, which is one of the 4 TSOs in Germany. Germany has extremely ambitious targets for decarbonization and the phasing out of coal. But I think Ralph is going to speak about his role in the European-wide system, particularly the 10-year network development plan and a new process called ERAA, which, as far as I know, it's only just been introduced. It appears to me to be a European-wide resource adequacy approach. Ralph, can you show yourself? Oh, sorry, Ralph is there in person. Sorry, and there's two speakers are in person, two are remote. Work away, Ralph.
Thanks. So, need to get this working here. Share. That looks good. No. I just wanted to switch again to the presenter screen. Perfectly. That's one. Oh, that's still not correct. We had it earlier.
You have to share your screen because it's going through my computer.
Okay.
It's not gonna.
No, it doesn't work.
Mark, it's taken just a few minutes to get the presentation loaded here. We're working on it.
Charlie, this is the beauty of remote sharing. You can do nothing.
I think you're going to have to turn off your video,
Yeah.
Mark, while Ralph is speaking.
Had it. So I will do it that way. Okay. So I guess now we got it. Sorry for the short delay. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Mark, for the kind introduction. And I'm pleased that I'm able today here to talk to such a crowd. I haven't talked to such a crowd for a while. Actually, I haven't talked to any crowd for a while, except for some people on the screen. So that is good that times are changing again. So what I'm going to do today is to present to you and acquaint with you the ERA 2021 process. ERA is a new European Resource Adequacy Assessment process which has just recently been established and has been issued in 2021 for the first time ever. I would like to present to you the purposes and the objectives of this process, given a quick insight into the scenarios investigated and the methodology applied. Then we'll have a look at some results and key takeaways and next steps. So why do we do this assessment? As we have learned yesterday already, also the European electricity supply system is changing at an unprecedented speed to meet the EU energy policy targets of net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. And probably also part of the discussion yesterday, the speed will even accelerate more. And this process, this transition process, needs to be regularly monitored with a resource adequacy assessment with new tools and appropriate adequate tools in order to monitor it properly. And when you look at the ESIG report on redefining resource adequacy, which was published a couple of months ago, actually you will find those principles, those methodologies and those guidelines that we actually also apply in this ERA process. The ERA is driven by a legal mandate, European legislation, and the necessity to implement new adequacy assessment methodologies. And it also addresses the need of stakeholders to better understand and to prepare to deliver the energy transition. So what do we do in the ERA, and how do we do it? The process is actually implemented stepwise. The methodology and the coverage of the scenarios will gradually increase and be enhanced until 2024, when we will have the full process implemented. And the final objective, of course, is then to have then at latest in place an effective tool to understand adequacy in the coming decade. With the first ERA released in 2021, the stakeholder feedback we have received, and also the regulators and policymakers review, the next ERA process of 2022 is already being initiated. We have a number of adequacy assessments available and established already in Europe. This just gives an overview where you can find the ERA. Those adequacy processes range from very short time operational issues, a week ahead forecast, up to very long-term instruments like the 10 years network development plan. And the ERA is somewhere in between. It will address adequacy for a 10 years forecast, and when it is fully implemented, this 10 years forecast will be done in an annual resolution. So understanding adequacy is essential. First of all, the ERA process shall create awareness about what are the risks of resource adequacy we will be facing in the future. And based on these identifications, we need to understand the drivers and the leverages and the critical factors in order to have a better understanding and be able to act adequately and to initiate early actions to mitigate possible risk in resource adequacy. ERA shall not be understood as a precise prediction on how the future will look like. It is more a kind of an early warning tool which shall enable informed system management decisions in order to timely address and timely mitigate possible resource adequacy risks. So let's have a look at what has been done in 2021. What are the scenarios and what methodology has been applied? Scenarios first. The 2021 ERA addressed two target years, 2025 and 2030. and it was based on so-called national estimate scenarios. National estimate means that those scenarios were based on scenario data which were delivered to NSOE by the European member TSOs. A particular attention was paid to the target year 2025, where those, which has then also been called the central scenario, and where these national estimates were further validated and evaluated by an economic viability assessment called EVA in order to have a deeper insight on these scenarios from a socio-economic perspective. And further on, for the central scenarios, also capacity mechanisms were applied in order to demonstrate to which extent incentives are needed or reasonable for achieving an appropriate resource adequacy. For both target years 2025 and 2030, also kind of a stress test or sensitivity analysis was carried out with scenarios with low thermal capacities. That should represent more extreme or more worst case conditions in terms of low thermal capacity resulting from early retiring of existing generation, which may happen because of even increased policy ambitions in order to reduce CO2 emissions, and delay in new build generation, which is also kind of typical effect you can expect that nothing comes at the time it is supposed to come. About the methodology, as said, for the central scenario, the EVA, the economic viability assessment, is a core element. And this shall be understood as a market simulation with the objective to optimize, which means minimize total system costs from a socio-economic perspective, including an investment model on generation. So market entries or exits of generation is computed endogenously in this market model. And it is based on total system costs, which comprise of the factors as listed here. And as a decision variable, the EVA is able to decommission existing generation or invest in new build generation, which is limited then to open or combined cycle gas turbines and demand flexibility to introduce. So what is the methodology of analysis? And I may refer again to also the ESIG report saying a deterministic approach is not appropriate in order to investigate all possible cases. And actually, probabilistic analysis has been carried out, and this is also part of the legislation on which the ERAA is built on, that it shall use probabilistic analysis. By a Monte Carlo simulation approach has been chosen, which combines numerous climate years, which are expressed by time series of wind, PV generation, cogeneration, and demand, with a number of time series of non-availability of conventional thermal generation unit. So having 35 climate years and 20 years time series of non-availability or outages of thermal generators, this will result in a total of 700 years, which have been calculated in an hourly resolution. What is also needed a kind of metric in order to assess the resource adequacy, and the parameter which was chosen, the metric which was chosen, is the loss of load expectation. So for each of the 700 years, the loss of load hours are computed then, and this exercise results then in the loss of load expectation, LOLE, also expressed in hours per year, which is defined as the average value of loss of load hours of all Monte Carlo years. This low value represents the expected numbers of hours per year where demand cannot be completely matched by the electricity market. Then you need a benchmark, of course, of low. Where should it be and where is it? And therefore, this benchmark is the definition of a so-called reliability standard, but also regulation says that each member state of the European Union shall define a reliability standard. And the reliability standard is defined as the value or the hours per year where the cost of new entry of generation matches the value of lost load, which the customer would be willing to pay to avoid a loss of supply. This is then results in a reliability standard, which is yes, is to be seen from a socio-economic perspective. So that is a benchmark. As the example here, see how you come to a reliability standard of 5 hours per year. And this chart here just gives an overview of which member states have already, or European states have already defined such standards. You see, not all of them have done so far. And for those where the national reliability standards are missing, as an assumption in the ERA, just the average of the defined values of the other states is taken then as a reference. So let's have a look at some results about the resource adequacy. Starting with the national estimate target years, we observed that for both years 2025 and 2030, there's a low risk of insufficient adequacy in Europe for the time being, because in most of the member states, no loss of load expectation occurs, or it is very low in a range of definitely less than an hour per year only. However, this results change when the EVA comes into place, where the further economical assessment, socio-economic assessment on the generation is carried out. And the EVA calculations have demonstrated that for the target year 2025, 75 gigawatts of the installed thermal capacity in Europe will be decommissioned from an economical perspective. And on the other hand, only 13 gigawatts of new generation would be built. Then the results on the adequacy look much different. I guess you cannot read from the distance the figures there, but there are a couple of years, a couple of countries where actually the loss of load expectation would be above the reliability standards. That can be particularly observed in the Central West Europe countries. When capacity mechanism is introduced, which of which the purpose is to add generation to the system in order to meet the reliability standards, not surprisingly, the loss of load expectation is reduced, and is reduced actually exactly to the national defined reliability standards. That's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, because that is actually the purpose of it. And it shows, that is more interesting here, that in order to achieve this across Europe, 4.5 gigawatts of additional capacity compared to the scenario without capacity mechanism is needed to bring the countries at or close to their reliability standards. With those sensitivity analysis for the two target years based with the low thermal capacity scenarios, then we also observe that this has a certain impact on the reliability standard and on resource adequacy. For 2025, This low thermal capacity means that across Europe there will be 21.7 less thermal capacity installed due to early retirements or late commissionings. And as a consequence, considerable adequacy risks appear in Poland, Lithuania, and France, because that are also the countries where most of these early retirements or late commissionings will take place. When we do the same exercise for the target year 2030, that will result in 36 gigawatts less thermal capacity installed, and significant adequacy risks in Poland and with impact on the neighboring country, for example, Lithuania and Germany. And that is another interesting finding from these calculations, obviously a consequence or owed to the interconnection and the internal electricity market, that adequacy issue is not a national issue only. If you have based on national decisions on retirements of generation due to, let's say, climate ambitions or in decisions in investing in new decisions, that it will have impact on other member states as well. That is certainly an impact which cannot be ignored, that no member state here in Europe can do whatever he wants without any impact on the neighbors. So what are the key takeaways from this first ERA exercise in 2021? If we do not have any targeted measures, actually we will expect adequacy risks from 2025 onwards, because from an economic perspective, incentives are needed in order to keep resource adequacy at an adequate or appropriate level. Cooperation is essential. So we need sustainable planning and cooperation and targeted measures across the member states, which are key for a secure pan-European electricity system. And coordination is needed because adequacy issues are deeply interlinked. Regional coordination, with, in particular between neighboring member states, are crucial. And first learning from ERA, there's a potential, there's headroom for improvements. So we learn a lot about what should be further enhanced and improved in the next years to come until the full implementation of the process in 2025. And that is the outlook, what we want to achieve by 2024. There are a number of areas where the ERA will improve and successively in the next years. As you have seen, we have investigated 2 target years only, and the final goal is to analyze the next 10 years in an annual resolution, so 10 years instead of 2 as for the first exercise. The economic viability assessment, this EVA procedure, also has a number of potentials for improvements, for additional factors to account for example, time coupling constraints to make economic decisions, not only based on the figures of 1 target years, but also look at the other years and have an integrated approach there. Flow-based market coupling will be introduced in the market simulation in order to account better for transmission constraints across Europe. Demand response sector integration, another issue, or the climate change impact, an issue which is also addressed in the ESIG paper on resource adequacy. So there's still a lot to do in the next years in order to further improve the process, but the first steps has been made. The first ERA was released and also has demonstrated some interesting figures already on how the system will change and resource adequacy will develop in Europe over the next decade. So that was my presentation to you for today. Thank you very much. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions, maybe even right now or later on in the discussion part of this session. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. So Ralph, we're going to leave the questions to the last session because of the setup we have right now. So that's fascinating. I think there's going to be lots of questions following on from that. It's great to see that, you know, someone is looking at resource adequacy at a continental basis, because I think that's what's needed. Moving swiftly along, as they say, Elaine Hart is our next speaker. Elaine. So Elaine is the founding principal of Moment Energy Insights, with a focus on, you know, decarbonization through analytics and planning. She's previously with Portland General Electric, and has also got a PhD from Stanford. And Elaine is going to now switch to California and the Western United States, which I think is a good complement to what Ralph just spoke about. Elaine? Elaine, you're on mute.
Yeah, figuring that out. Can you guys hear me okay now?
I can hear you anyway.
And can you see my slides?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm excited to talk to you about a study that we've been working on for just over a year, and it's about to wrap up. So you'll actually be the first to see some of these results. And I'm hopeful that they'll spur some interesting conversation about the nature of the RA challenge in the West, and maybe some tough questions for all of us as we continue to grapple with this topic. Before I jump in, I want to acknowledge Anna Maleva of Blue Marble Analytics, who's co-leading this effort and is the modeling brains behind a lot of what you'll see today. And I also want to thank Grid Lab for supporting this project. So the problem statement for this study goes something like this. There's been a sense in the West that there's an impending resource adequacy problem sometime in the 2020s. We might already be there. And in particular, as we continue to retire coal without one-for-one replacements with thermal capacity. There are numerous studies in the West that point to this, but nearly all of these studies focus on a particular part of the region. And that usually means that there's simplified treatment for things like imports, market interactions, and the conditions in the rest of the West that influence the availability of excess generation to support each sort of sub-region within the West. Just because these studies are so computationally challenging, they often also tend to be relatively opaque. So it can be hard to decipher exactly how the rest of the West is being treated. For example, whether correlations during extreme weather are being reasonably accounted for, whether transmission constraints are being enforced and respected, how much the identified sort of needs in one part of the region might be influenced by resource decisions and build out that's going on in another part of the region. And we just lack a coherent data set of the entire West with the sort of required level of granularity and rigor to do these large sort of modern West-wide resource adequacy analysis, and also regionally informed studies of individual systems within the West. And so, you know, I would argue that even though we have all these great studies out there, we really don't have a single coherent or multiple sort of coherent understandings of the RA challenge in the West throughout the 2020s. And in fact, I don't think we even really understand what the RA challenge is today in the West because of this. So that's the gap that we've tried to fill with this project. Our models built on an open source tool called GridPath. This tool was built by Blue Marble Analytics over the last 5 years. It's been used elsewhere for capacity expansion and production cost modeling. In this effort, we just leveraged a small fraction of its capabilities and functionalities, and we combined it with a lot of data development and some statistical modeling, primarily Monte Carlo, to outfit it for resource adequacy studies. In addition to making the code available, we'll also be making available all of those data sets that were used in the study so others can directly utilize this work, but also hopefully over time improve upon it as we learn more about these challenges and we get better data. In the first phase, we focus primarily on issues related to regional coordination and weather patterns as they're experienced across the West. GridPath is an optimization model. So this is a time sequential RA model. We're able to co-optimize energy limited resources like energy storage and demand response with the availability of renewables. We also are able to optimize hydro dispatch and hybrid project dispatch. And we can explicitly model transmission flows in the zonal topology that you see on the right here. Each of those dots is one of our transmission zones, and the lines connecting them are our simplified transmission paths. We also, in this phase, we incorporate temperature-driven thermal capacity derates, but we don't yet incorporate weather-driven outages. That's on our wish list for a future phase. So in this project, we tackled 3 primary scenarios, all in the year 2026. In the base scenario, we include existing resources and resources that were under construction as of about this time last year. And we exclude any resources that had announced a retirement date prior to 2026, sort of in that same time frame. This case does not include any planned resource additions. So it really provides a baseline upon which you might evaluate resource plans or programmatic solutions. In the second scenario, we add clean resources in California that roughly align with the CPUC preferred system plan through 2026. And in the third scenario, this is the less coal scenario, we keep those additions in California, but we also retire about 11 gigawatts of coal elsewhere in the West. And I think the intention with the California additions is that that's providing a little bit more than 11 gigawatts of capacity to the system, even though it's many more megawatts of clean resources. And so this is intended to be a little bit of a swap for clean energy resources for coal. Today, I'm actually only going to show results from the base scenario and the less coal scenario, as you'll probably see once you take a look at the base scenario. The California addition scenario was actually more than adequate. And for both of those scenarios that we'll walk through, I'm going to be showing you both west-wide results and hopefully, if we have time, results from the perspective of a subregion within the West, and a couple of different ways of interpreting their subregional needs in the context of the broader system. So let's start with the base scenario. Here we show some of the loss of load statistics for the base scenario. And I'll just note that as we were developing this work, ESIG came out with the Redefining RA report with some recommended metrics that go beyond these high-level metrics like LLP and EUE. And so we'll be providing many more metrics in the final report to align with some of those recommendations. And we show some of the sort of ways of rolling up and presenting the data here as well. So this scenario sees some amount of lost load in half of all the simulated years. And in this, for the results we're showing you today, we simulated 1,000 years. It has an LOLE of just over 10 days every 10 years. And here we define a day of lost load as a day where there's unserved energy experienced at any time during that day. So it's not 240 hours of lost load, it's 10 days with some amount of lost load at some point in time. And it's got an LOLH of about 2.2 hours per year. This system sees lost load solely in hot summer evenings, with the greatest risk occurring in hour ending 18 in August. That's 7 p.m. in daylight time. Pacific daylight time. These events are relatively short in duration. They average 2.2 hours per event, and we actually don't see any events that persist longer than 7 hours. So what does this mean in terms of resource need? Well, it depends on your standard, and we're not advocating for any particular standard in this project and in our report, but for simplicity, when we're comparing resource needs between scenarios, we show them based on a 1 day and 10-year standard, where, like I said, unserved energy experienced at any time during a day counts as a loss of load day. So given that our A standard, we can calculate resource needs in terms of perfect capacity. And for this system, it's about 6,700 megawatts of perfect capacity required to meet that standard. But we all know, and as others have noted already this morning, most capacity isn't perfect. Many of the RA solutions that are on the table in the West have energy limitations, whether it's battery storage or demand response. And so this picture on the left shows a two-dimensional distribution of those days where we observe lost load, with the capacity shortage along the top, the columns there, and the energy shortage along the rows. Now, you could draw a straight vertical line right at 6,758 megawatts on this picture, and you'd eliminate all of the events to the left of that line, and you'd end up with just one event expected every 10 years remaining to the right of it, and that would meet the standard. But you can see that in this bottom left sort of corner of the graph, there aren't really there are very few events that have a fair amount of energy needs associated with them. And so we can kind of tell intuitively that a perfect capacity solution in this particular situation is probably overkill. The system doesn't really need perfect capacity. The box that you see drawn on the distribution This also achieves a 1 day and 10-year standard. Instead of using perfect capacity, it provides, it's a resource that provides 7,000 megawatts and 20,000 megawatt hours. So it's nearly a 3-hour resource, and it can provide that when it's needed. And you could draw an infinite number of boxes on this picture and achieve the standard. So how do you sort of translate that into actual sort of decision making? At Wright, we summarize a few of those different options, and we represent them as an efficient frontier. So for a given duration, this line here on the graph on the right represents the minimum amount of capacity that's needed to achieve the standard for a given duration. The cost optimal point will fall somewhere along this curve, depending on the relative cost of energy and capacity associated with all of your various resource options. And you can see pretty clearly in this case that there really isn't much benefit for providing more than 3 hours of duration for this particular system. So the cost optimal point probably falls between 2 and 4 hours. It's really unlikely to fall beyond 4 hours. You know, in the interest of time, so I know we've got a few presenters here, I'm going to skip the CAISO sub-regional results here, but I'd be happy to talk to them in the Q&A if y'all would like to. We're going to actually just go straight to the less coal scenario. So this one's pretty interesting. Recall that the less coal scenario makes 2 major adjustments from the base scenario. First, it adds clean resources in California to generally reflect the CPUC preferred system plan. And second, it retires about 11 gigawatts of coal elsewhere in the West. And all of that coal that's being retired happens to be in the footprint of sort of a RAP-like resource adequacy, the Western Resource Adequacy Program like footprint, and we'll get to that in a second. Now, we built this scenario because we wanted to show a system under stress. The base scenario wasn't all that stressed. And we wanted to see what would happen if you add a bunch of clean energy and you take out a lot of that sort of traditional baseload capacity. So there's only 7 gigawatts of coal remaining in the West in this scenario. And yet we don't see a lot of resource adequacy problems. In fact, this scenario has an LOLE of 1.75 days every 10 years. It almost meets a 1 day and 10-year standard without any further action. And as you can see in the heat map and this distribution of the event durations, the vast majority of the events that remain are just 1 or 2 hours in summer evenings. It's a really good fit for energy storage and flexible load. Now let's take a look at a sub-regional perspective. And what we'll see here is that the nature of the RA problem in this cleaner system is highly dependent on regional coordination and how planning entities take each other into account. So the left panel here shows the loss of load risk for a footprint that roughly aligns with the entities. I should say, because this study is entirely based on publicly available data, we've focused just on the overlap of WEC and the United States. So Canada and Mexico are excluded from the analysis. So here we're focusing on those entities roughly that are considering joining the Western Resource Adequacy Program, or RAP, with a couple of caveats. You can see a whole list of the BAs that are included at the bottom. This is a physical model, and so resources are assigned to these BAs based on where they're interconnected, not assigned to LSEs based on the loads that they are obligated to serve. So that's an important caveat for this phase of the work, that this is a physical model, and developing a contractual layer on top of this is something we're excited to do in a future phase, but may require using confidential data. Now, in this case, all of the coal across this footprint has been retired in this scenario. And if you look at the heat map on the left, this shows the sort of RA risk associated with the scenario if you were to treat that RAP footprint as an island system, so it can't see the rest of the West. All of the entities within RAP can coordinate with one another, but they have no imports from outside regions, from California in particular. And in this situation, from this perspective, this sort of planning policy, it looks like the system requires about 9 gigawatts of additional perfect capacity to replace the 11 gigawatts of additional coal retirements relative to the base scenario. But if you look at the heat map on the right, this is what happens if you account for imports. And in this situation, what we've said is that if there's excess generation available elsewhere in the West during the periods where the RAP footprint is seeing unserved energy, and if there's enough transmission to make use of that excess generation, then you can avoid some of the loss of load events. And what we see is you sort of, by accounting for imports, you sort of whittle that resource adequacy problem down considerably. The winter problem goes away altogether, and the summer starts to align with this shorter duration challenge that we identified for the West-wide results. So what we're finding is that not only is it important to coordinate between utilities with efforts like the Western Resource Adequacy Program, but it's also critical to ensure that these programs are accounting for one another across the West in a reasonable manner. And as we'll describe more in our report, adopting boundary conditions for these programs, which is really what we're doing here, is not strictly a modeling decision, sort of a technical detail. These are really policies that these entities need to adopt based on their own risk tolerance, and then ensure that their models can reflect those policies. In our study, we adopt a policy that achieves a couple of things. One, it accounts for the availability of imports subject to transmission limits based on coherent weather conditions across the entire West. And we determined that this was important because we found, as we're looking at these studies, we found that there were very few studies that where you could be confident that they were doing that. And very often the import assumptions were being informed by sort of average conditions elsewhere in the West. And that's problematic if you've got a large weather system that's covering the majority of the West at the same time, like a large heat event, for example. And the second thing that we prioritized with our study was that, the policy does not assume that other entities will necessarily take action to mitigate their own RA challenges. So in these sub-regional views, in particular, the graph on the right here, the entity is planning to leverage excess generation if investments have already been made. But they don't plan to lean on further investments that their neighbors may make because they don't coordinate on a planning basis with those neighbors. And so they can't be sure that they'll necessarily take incremental action and count on there being more excess generation available. But we discuss all of this more in the report, and I'm happy to take questions on it. And we have some additional slides at the end that describe it in a little bit more detail. But our report will be out soon. We're currently finalizing our last set of runs, which dig a bit more into the weather drivers of RA challenges, how those types of weather patterns have changed across the historical record, what that might mean for RA analysis. We're really excited to get this work out there. And we'll also, as I mentioned, be making the data sets and code available. And GridPath itself, if anyone's interested, you can already go out and GitHub, and the link is shown here to download it and take it for a spin. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to hand it back to Mark.
Okay, excellent, Elaine. I think there's a very common thread between you and Ralph for sure. Coordination seems to be the name, which I think is perfectly realistic. So our next speaker, we're going to pop across back to Europe for Hannah. The UK is still part of Europe, just for everyone's information. As an Irishman, I can say that. So Hannah is on the weather side. She's not an engineer. I think you're a meteorologist, Hannah. Is that correct? Sorry. Is everybody, can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, okay. I think it's Hannah frozen, is she? Hannah? I think we've lost Hannah, have we?
We can hear you here, Mark. We can see both of you, but we can't hear
Hannah.
Hannah.
Yeah. Hannah? Let me finish off introducing her, see if we can get her to, yeah, she seems so completely frozen. Hannah?
Oh, sorry, I'm having all kinds of problems with the internet today. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can, Hannah. I would suggest, yeah, I suggest you leave your camera off. It'd probably help on the bandwidth.
Yeah, I think that's what kicked it over the edge a second ago. Okay,
I think it was my crass joke about the UK and Europe that pushed it over the edge.
Well, sensitive subject, yeah.
Anyway, Hannah's a research associated with climate risk analytics, University of Bristol. She got an interest in climate change and climate variability and its impact on power systems, which is a big, big topic I think she's going to bring to the party, so to speak, the weather. I mean, what we've just heard from Ralph and from Elaine, the weather is now a major driver of everything. So I think Hannah's perspective will be very useful. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, exactly that. So thank you for having me at the ESIG meeting again. I came to the meeting we had in Denver a few years ago and I had a great time. So it's really lovely to be back. So yeah, I like that. We're bringing weather to the party. This is, I like that saying. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about a few bits of work we've done during the COVID period, which think about the characterization of extreme weather, which is relevant for these kind of very extreme situations that we've been talking about today. So thank you to all my collaborators at the bottom. So just to set the scene a bit, we know that weather systems across, energy systems across the world are becoming really weather dependent. And this results in a lot more power system variability. So this is all the way from second scale balancing all the way out to decadal scale variability. And we need to understand the meteorological drivers of this for reliable system operation. So the weather dependence can come in the traditional sense through the wind, solar and hydropower, or it can come in through the vulnerability of our grid to extreme weather events, or in through the demand, which is dependent on temperature, wind chills and relative humidity, etc. So traditionally, I think when energy modelers tend to look at thinking about resource adequacy, you might just go grab some metered data available from the grids. But we argue as climate scientists that actually your metered data, it's not as useful anymore if you want to start to think about resource adequacy problems. So we've got an example here. Hello, can you still hear me?
Yes.
All right, sorry, you just all disappeared. So we've got an example here of US generation from 1950 through to present. And you can kind of see that the coal generation, you had peak in around 2005 and then dropped rapidly off. And the renewables here is really starting to ramp up to meet kind of climate mitigation targets. So arguably, if you look at the renewable output you had in 2000, the location of the renewable generation is quite different from what you've got now in 2020. So this is challenging if you want to start calculating return periods of extreme events or loss of load probabilities. So this is where the weather data can come in. So I think resource adequacy is a really interdisciplinary problem. Weather data is becoming really key. But we do have some problems in this, that climate scientists tend to focus on the source of the resource adequacy problem. So maybe the heat wave, the cold wave, or the extratropical storm, using maybe thousands of years of climate data at lower resolution than the energy modeler would like. Whereas the energy modeler is focused on things like loss of load probability, curtailment, system adequacy issues. And there's this interface where we all start to meet in the middle, where we can think about things like peak demand, and times of low and high wind generation. So this is just a plot taken from a recent article from Next Generation Energy Climate Committee. I'd encourage you to read this. It's quite a fun way to think about how we might tackle some of these issues. So a recent example in Europe where we had a big RA issue was over this summer from April to September 2021. We experienced the lowest wind speeds in the last 60 years. So this graph is taken from the World Climate Service. And you see that this area is shaded in dark orange here. If you take the climatological average from 1960 to 2020 and look at the wind speeds from an ERA 5 reanalysis product, we were in big trouble. It was very not windy. This was coupled with some problems. The French interconnector was down, so we weren't able to get power from France. I think it caught fire or something very helpful like that. It was also, demand was rising as we were coming out of lockdown periods due to COVID, and it was just a bit of a perfect storm, really. But having long meteorological data sets allowed us to put this event into context and to say, well, do you know what? This won't happen every year. This is a 1 in 60 year event, but we still need to be able to be prepared for it. And it was very interesting that it happened in the lead up to COP26 and shaped quite a lot of the conversations about where we should be investing in the 80 gigawatts of wind power that the UK have committed to build by 2050. So all good fun. So how does my work fit into this? So a lot of the work I've been doing has been how to get weather data into usable formats for energy modelers. So a key thing we do in the groups at Reading and Bristol is take gridded weather and climate data and convert it into energy variables using statistical or physical models. So there's some examples below and a link to our Reading Research Data Repository where we keep a lot of this. But the key thing is we fix a power system setup. So for example, take 2021 installed capacities of wind, solar and demand, and then we roll out weather years through that. So we can get all of these different approximations of weather that happened for a set level of demand. And we can use this to really unpack extreme event analysis and thinking about worst case scenarios. You can also do this forward. So looking at future power systems like 2030. And a key tool we use is reanalysis data to do this. So you might have heard of some of these before, but it's a meteorological product, which is an optimal combination of a weather forecast model and all the gridded observations we have. So it's kind of like a meteorologist's best guess of what's going on at the moment. So in terms of some results, let's think about historical assessment first. A key problem across Europe is peak demand. And we did a study recently which looked at the top 10 events. So we use the methods I've just described. We fixed the power system at the 2020 levels, and we looked at the worst weather conditions for our power system from 1980 through to present. What we're looking here is meteorological composites of the top 10 worst peak demand events for the UK at the top and Spain at the bottom. So we've got surface temperature anomalies, surface wind speed anomalies, and then solar radiation anomalies. So the key thing we'd find for the UK is that we hit peak demands during winter cold snaps. So we have high pressure located over Central Europe. But the key thing is it's also really cold over France, Germany, Poland, Norway, Sweden, all of these countries. A lot of these which we're interconnected to and reliant on for power. So the issue becomes greater because we all experience stress at the same time. As well as this, we all experience very low wind conditions from our North Sea wind pool, which really adds to the challenge. Conversely, if we look in Southern Europe, for example, in Spain here, their peak demands come during summer heat waves. So these are much more localized events, which maybe only affect 1 or 2 countries at once. And they have average wind and solar conditions. So renewables are actually able to provide a bit during these summer peak demand events. A key thing that happened, recently you had the massive American event of kind of the big Texas storm, where everything got very, very cold. Our recent UK example was called the Beast from the East, which happened in 2018. And this was a difficult event for us. We had a lot of snow. The grid really struggled, and the national grid contacted us to say, like, you know, this event is very hard work. Is this as bad as it gets? And we can use our very long records of meteorological data to fix the system at that point and look backwards. And we were able to say, well, actually, no, this was only this February the 28th, 2018. It was only the 6th worst event we've had in the last 30-year period. And even with climate change, these events at the top would still be possible. So you actually need to be able to plan for something slightly worse than what you had. We're very sorry. So this interaction with meteorologists can help provide some extra information about the weather conditions which are happening. An interesting thing about the Beast from the East is actually we had very high wind speeds during this event. So it just shows you that not all events are kind of the same. And it is possible to still have quite a lot of renewable generation available at times of peak demand. Another historical assessment we've been doing recently with more of an infrastructure perspective is using these long time series of data to assess the potential damage that historical tropical cyclones could cause. So the focus here is on Mexico, but it'd be very easy to extend out to the northern US if anyone is interested. There are 4 key sites across Mexico that they're thinking about developing large offshore wind turbines. And we used a large cyclone tracking database to assess at these 4 different sites how many storms would pass through the region per year, but more importantly, how many storms would pass through the region that might cause loss or damage to the wind turbines. And what was interesting, that in some regions like the Yucatan Peninsula, you might get as many as 3 large storms that could cause damage coming through in one single year if you're very unlucky. And through using short meteorological records, you wouldn't have captured this information, and it could be very costly. So looking towards the future, one thing we did recently was collaborating with Newcastle University, so actually working with some energy system modelers to think about heat pumps. So the UK is planning substantial heat pump rollout, and this results in significant increases in the temperature sensitivity of demand. So more heat pumps result in a much peakier demand. And this reasonably complicated plot here is basically showing you the additional capacity to secure without a heat pump in a cross or with heat pumps. So the time period here is out to 2025, and it's based on our heat and building strategy UK heat pump rollout, which is quite significant. I think it's nearly 1 million heat pumps a year we're planning to install. So if we take 1 year here, very cold temperature anomaly a year, 2010-11, we see that actually through building out all these heat pumps and electrifying demand, you're going to need an extra 1.5 gigawatts of additional capacity at times of peak demand. And this is something that isn't well accounted for yet in grids assessments. So this plot has lots of different winters on it. And I think the key thing to notice that there's the colors of the temperature anomaly. So it's not straightforward that the colder the year is, the more energy you need to supply, because some of these years were cold and still, and some of them were just cold. So there's quite a big variability depending on whether wind power was present at times of peak demand. Hopefully this also emphasizes how relying on a typical meteorological year, one of these ones in the middle, might result in you getting your additional capacity to secure at times of peak wrong by up to 3 plus or minus 3 gigawatts. Just to finish thinking about future climate, another thing that we're asked a lot as a meteorologist is how many more extreme events can we get in the future? So we've got a paper in review at the moment, which starts to think about taking outputs from high resolution climate models and thinking about how many extra hot days might we get per year. And then coupling with this, with if the days are also hot and still, or hot and still and cloudy. And from this, you can see that the axes are changing, the y-axes, but there's a lot less events where it's both hot and still or hot and still and cloudy. So we hope that in the future, even though there will be a lot more hot days, there should be renewable generation in some of these days to help meet demand. And just finally, predictability is increasing. So I think what's very important is once we identify the weather conditions which are important from a resource adequacy perspective, it'd be great if we could see these quite a long way into the future so that, you know, grid operators can make planning decisions. And a recent study that's just come out that I was involved in with Daniela de Meissen in BAMS has started to look at some case studies. So we've got 2 big heat waves here, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast of America. We can actually see signals for these heat waves in the models up to 3 weeks in advance. So granted, these are case studies. We're not going to be able to predict every single heat wave for that at that threshold, but it does show you that predictability is increasing, and meteorologists are continuing to work hard to find out if there's conditional predictability where you know, life-changing decision-making can be made. So I'll leave my summary there because I know it's for short of time, but thank you so much for listening. And I'm happy to take any questions later, or please email me if you'd like to get any of these slides. Thank you.
Excellent, Hannah. It was really, really good. I have to say, I think you ended on a positive note. Predictability is getting better. I think a lot of power systems people will be very pleased to hear that. Our last speaker then is Genevieve. She's with EPRI. She joined in April 2021, so she's a newbie to EPRI. She came from GE Energy Consulting, though, which was also well known to ESIG. And she's a graduate of RPI, of which I think many people in ESIG know it well. Genevieve, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. And Genevieve is going to talk about this large study that I think a lot of people know about that EPRI are running on resource adequacy. Okay, do you want to show yourself, Genevieve, or it's up to yourself?
Yeah, we're just getting the slides up.
Oh yeah, sorry, you're in person, pardon me. And just for everyone's information, we have a little bit more time than is in the schedule. Myself and Charlie had a little Charlie chat just beforehand, so we're going to allow this session run over. Charlie the puppeteer.
Thank you. I don't know. Okay. Thank you. I don't think it's showing here. Do I?
And if people can get their questions ready, we'll start straight into questions immediately after Genevieve, and we'll spend, I'd say, 10 or 15 minutes on questions, whatever, and get some discussion done.
We're going to let it run about 15 minutes, so that there'll be a 15-minute break instead of a 30-minute break. I misjudged the time allocation for the session.
Perfect. Thank you.
No, that's not what he said to me on the phone, but go on. Okay, Genevieve, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to speak about an initiative that we started at EPRI last May. It's a multi-year initiative. Is this better? Sorry, everyone. Is this any better? I can always hold it up if need be. Around resource adequacy for a decarbonized future. I'll just jump right in and talk through the way we've structured this initiative. We've structured it around 3 main workflows. The first around resource adequacy processes. So here we're looking to answer questions around what are the appropriate metrics to use in resource adequacy analysis going forward, and how should we go about setting the minimum criteria for those. We're also looking to develop a number of guidelines and a tool to support resource planners to select the right scenarios when they're running their resource adequacy analysis. The second piece of the workflow is around models and data. And here we're putting forward a set of guidelines around how to model, especially emerging technologies, what needs to be included from a modeling standpoint to make sure we have accurate behavior when we're evaluating resource adequacy. And then there's a data piece to this as well. How do you parameterize those models? What kind of data do you need for those models in terms of balancing accuracy, and then what's reasonable or feasible when you're running resource adequacy studies? And then the third piece of the work stream is around analysis tools. And here we're not looking to create any kind of new tool, but really just evaluate existing tool functionalities and see if there's areas of improvements that are needed as we're moving into resource adequacy in a future world with these different system conditions and changing resource mix. And throughout this all, we're basing this around a number of case studies. Reason for this is it allows us to test all of our recommendations across a number of different systems. And we're making sure to evaluate a number of different systems with different resource mixes and different resource adequacy problems. And the last thing I'll say about this is we are going to make all the main deliverables for this initiative public and viewable for everyone in the community, in the hopes that this will be trying to make this as useful as possible for the community as a whole. In this next slide, I've got listed out all of our project members as well as our R&D partners and our advisory group. I won't go over them all here, just to note that we've got a wide variety of people here supporting us in this initiative. Project members include a fair number of ISOs and utilities and regulatory bodies, so they'll all approach the resource adequacy problem slightly differently and have slightly different interests, but all working towards the same goal here. We've got our advisory group, and their role is really to make sure that the work we're doing is broadly applicable for industry as a whole. And then a number of R&D partners here supporting us with our case studies and a number of our deliverables. In this next slide, I want to just talk a little bit about one of the deliverables in particular, which is the metrics and criteria deliverable. I won't go over it in too much detail here. I'll just say that this is structured around a two-piece deliverable with the first white paper, which is in final layout right now, will be published in the next week or two, available to download at this link, in which we're summarizing existing and proposed resource adequacy metrics. We've also got a survey of resource adequacy metrics and criteria around the world included there. And that's really meant as a summary deliverable. And then we're going to evaluate a whole suite of risk and capacity evaluation metrics throughout our case studies. And based on that information, we're going to put forward a set of recommendations and guidelines in a second white paper, which we'll include at the end of this project. That'll be published then. Just going over a few key insights. And again, this first white paper is really meant as more of a summary paper. So there's not too many recommendations yet, but there's a few things that have come up and become apparent just as we're compiling these lists of metrics. And I think they echo some of the work that the Resource Adequacy Task Force at ESIG has put out. The first key insight I'll say is avoid relying on a single metric. I think we've gotten comfortable doing that in the past, but there's no single metric that exists that's really going to give you a full picture of system risk. You're always going to have to use a number of complementary metrics there. So in the way that LOLE can give you information on the days per year with loss of load events, it's really not going to give you an idea of the depth of those loss of load events. You need more of an EUE metric for that. And then the second piece of advice I'd say is to better leverage existing metrics. When we've been doing this work, it's clear that there's a lot of functionality that's already there. You can just slightly tweak the existing metrics in the way you calculate them or the way you view results, and gain a lot of information there without needing to come up with a totally different metric. So one example of that would be the LOLE 95 metric, which Belgium has started calculating in addition to the traditional LOLE metric. And that's the 95th percentile of the LOLE. And it allows you to gain more insight into the tail end risk events in the system. So that's one great example of doing that. And then the third piece of key insight I'd give is to ensure that the metrics you're using are appropriate for the intended uses in system studies. I think this comes up a lot in capacity evaluation metrics. I know there's a study discussion later this morning about that. Sometimes approximations are a great shortcut. Sometimes that may not be appropriate. And then there's a discussion as well in terms of what's doable to calculate within an operational time frame versus a longer term planning time frame. So those are things to be aware of there. Moving along, because I know we're a little short on time here, to a second deliverable that I wanted to touch upon, which is the tool review. So here we're documenting the capabilities of the main commercial and open source tools available for resource adequacy. And it's less about comparing one tool to another, but really gain an understanding of where the industry as a whole at this point in time. And to do that, we've created a survey, which we sent out to a number of tool vendors and published on the EPRI website, containing a number of multiple choice questions. We've gotten 21 responses so far, which was much more than we were anticipated. So very grateful for that. And we're going through analyzing those tool vendor responses. That's obviously quite a bit of data to go through, reaching out to tool vendors as appropriate to get a little more information there because the multiple choice format is a little limiting. And then finally, we're also testing a number of new tool capabilities through our case studies. And I'll just go over the very first question of our RFI here, which was what solving algorithm does your tool use? And the one thing I'll draw attention to here is most of the tools that responded to our survey use Monte Carlo with cost optimization. Reason being for that, a lot of them were primarily initially production cost tools that added on resource adequacy functionality. And I think what's going to be really interesting going forward is seeing if that's where the industry is going in terms of tools is working first from a production cost model with that resource adequacy functionality as there's more of a demand for some features that might traditionally be thought of as being more in that space. But what that brings up is obviously issues of computational tractability as you move from more of a deterministic study to a probabilistic analysis, and talking through what features you might need to compromise on in order to implement other features in your model. So that's something we're looking at answering as well as part of this initiative. And then finally, I want to go over a bit of key feedback that we've gotten from our members and our advisors. I think this has been a really valuable piece of the initiative, at least for me, is to hear from everyone in the industry. We've gotten a fair number of overall feedback. I think the case studies have been very well received. We've been really cautioned to choose them carefully to make sure a large variety of systems are represented. We've also heard a lot of times, the fact that enacting change is going to be challenging, especially because so many of the stakeholders really own only one piece of the resource adequacy planning process. And then we've heard that there's a need for clear delineation of what a resource adequacy study should encompass. For example, do we include flexibility analysis as part of resource adequacy or not? In terms of the metrics work stream, when we asked project members, this was ranked the #1 priority for them. Obviously, risk metrics were of high interest, but also capacity accreditation metrics. And one thing we've heard from them is make sure metrics are as easy to use and interpret as possible without losing too much accuracy, and that they're tailored to the study goals. So not just have one set of metrics, have each metric applicable to your specific study. And then for the scenarios work stream, something we've heard a lot about is there's a high amount of interest in terms of modeling and quantifying the impact of low frequency, high impact events, for example, the extreme weather events that we've been hearing about. For resource adequacy simulation tools, there's a lot of existing tool functionality that's already out there. What we've heard is there might be issues with data availability, computational tractability as you move into a probabilistic analysis, and then ease of implementation might also be stopping some users from implementing some of these tool functionalities. And another piece of feedback we've gotten and heard a few times is the fact that these production cost, capacity expansion, and resource adequacy disciplines are converging, and there's a high amount of interest with our members in terms of finding tools that can really bridge the gap across these disciplines. For the models work stream, again, a need for correlated outage risk modeling that's been reiterated a few times. High interest in more accurate energy storage models. We found that there's a pretty wide range in terms of how everyone models their energy storage from one system to another. And then this understanding that these emerging technologies are evolving very rapidly, and we can't just set these models once and forget about them. It's something we have to iterate on in time. And then finally, for the data work stream, something we've heard a lot is this need for correlated wind, solar, hydro, temperature, load data sets, ideally 20, 30 years worth. Also, there's a high interest in more accurately modeling load shape. People are wanting to consider DER and electrification and climate change, but just really struggling to do that because there's not always the data available to do that. And then finally, guidelines for when to use historical data versus synthetic data, and how you might go about creating that synthetic data would be useful. Next steps on the project, as I said, the metrics report will come out in the next week or two. We're working on the gap analysis, and we've started work on scenario tool developments and reference models. We've got a number of case studies that we've started that in various stages of completion, and we're meeting with our members and advisors regularly. And that being said, we always welcome feedback from this group or from the larger group. So very excited to hear what feedback this group has today. Thank you.